Everyone's focusing on protein to get bigger muscles, but nobody's focusing on the most important organ, your brain. Your brain is the organ that helps you solve problems, regulate emotions. Every difficult conversation you navigate, every creative idea that you have, all comes down to how well your brain functions. Yet most people spend their entire time maximizing their physique without maximizing their brain ability to function at a high level. The reason for that is honestly simple. Brain performance is a little bit harder to visibly see, but it's very, very important. So today we're gonna discuss the best possible diet that you can have to achieve peak brain function. Let's dive into it. If you are new to the channel, my name is Hassan and I'm a medical student. My goal is to break down complex scientific topics in a way that we can use in our day-to-day life. So if you want to support the mission, subscribe and let's get started. Chapter number 1. For a long time, I assumed that exercising, sleeping 8 hours a day and resting is enough to achieve peak performance. I thought that if I did all these things, my brain would eventually take care of itself. And to be clear, exercise and sleep are very, very crucial for optimal brain performance, but they are not everything. There's one important aspect, and it's your diet, what you eat. Your brain is very metabolically expensive, so it consumes a lot of energy. Your brain relies on precise chemical signaling and is very sensitive to fluctuations in fuel supply and structural materials. You can be doing everything right on the surface and yet still experience bad performance. You can still experience mental fatigue and low focus if your brain is not being supported at a biological level. And I learned this the hard way. At one point, I was on a bulk and I was also on a vacation. So it was the perfect combination to go absolutely all in. I was eating everything, burger, tacos, everything. At one point, I was feeling a little bit less energized, even though I was sleeping 8 hours and going to the gym. So I started researching what possible reason could lead to my condition. I was experiencing mental fatigue, low energy levels, lower level of focus, and it turned out to be that my diet was absolutely horrible for my brain. Even though I was getting a lot of protein and carbs, I was not getting the right kind of food that will support my brain's function. So I researched a lot about diet, the brain, how different foods affect the brain in different ways, and I'm gonna give you all what I've learned. To understand how food affects the brain, we need to understand what the brain actually is. In simple terms, the brain is an organ made of tissues. Those tissues are made of cells. In the brain, these cells are called glial cells and neurons. And the human brain contains more than 86 billions of those neurons. And each neuron can form thousands of connections with other neurons. But intelligence is not alone determined by how many neurons that you actually have. What matters is how well those neurons are connected and how adaptable those connections are over time. So in other words, your brain is not a storage device. It's a dynamic communication network. And once you understand that, nutrition will start to make sense. Now, let's get into the part about nutrition. From a functional perspective, brain-supportive food can fall into two broad categories. The first category is food that will give your brain the structural building blocks. It's the kind of food that will give your brain the ability to make the neurons send signals between each other efficiently and fast. The second category is food that will help your brain with the executive function. So it's things like focus, attention, impulse control, and sustained mental effort. So I will start with the structure, because without a good wiring, no amount of mental motivation will compensate. Neurons are not just electrical units. They are biological cells wrapped in lipid membranes. And these membranes are not just passive barriers. They contain receptors, ion channels, and signaling machinery that determines how information flows in and out of the cell. So the composition of those membranes matters a lot. Omega-3 fatty acids, especially DHA, are a critical component of neuronal membrane. It helps increase the membrane fluidity, and that means that the membrane will stay flexible rather than rigid. So when the membrane is flexible by being fluid, ion channels will open more efficiently. Electrical signals will propagate with less resistance, And therefore, communication between neurons will become faster and more concise. So roughly 60% of your brain's dry weight is fat, and a significant portion of that fat is omega-3 fatty acids. So if omega-3 fatty acids are not available in sufficient amounts, the fluidity will not be as optimal, and therefore the signaling will be not as precise and as fast. Over time, this will develop a brain that still functions, but with a lot more friction. So mental fatigue appears sooner, processing becomes slower, and adaptability decreases. DHA also plays a huge role in the formation and maintenance of myelin. Myelin is the fatty layer that insulates neuronal axons. Myelin has two functions. It helps electrical signals travel way faster, and it also reduces energy loss. Without adequate myelin, neurons can still communicate, but the process is inefficient and exhausting. This is one of the reasons why structural nutrition has long-term cognitive effects. But structural materials are not enough. The brain also needs a signal that tells it when and where it should strengthen the connections. And this is where BDNF comes in. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor is a protein that supports neuron survival and synaptic plasticity. It encourages neurons to form new connections and strengthens the already existing ones. So learning, for example, at a biological level, it's a physical remodeling process, and BDNF accelerates that process. When BDNF levels are high, the brain adapts more easily to new information. When BDNF levels are low, learning becomes slower and more challenging. Certain food contains components that help with the gene expression related to BDNF. It's something like dark chocolate, just to mention an example. When these compounds reach your brain, they activate signaling pathways that increases BDNF expression. This doesn't instantly make you smarter, but it creates an environment that supports learning and neural adaptation over time. In other words, food can function as a biological instruction instead of just a calorie source. Executive functions refer to the brain's ability to sustain attention, regulate impulses, and pursue long-term goals. This function depends heavily on neurotransmitters balance, stable energy supply, and an adequate blood flow. Caffeine, for example, enhances alertness by blocking adenosine, a molecule that signals fatigue. By removing this inhibitory signal, neurotransmitters involved in attention and motivation can act more effectively. Choline, for example, which is found in high concentration in eggs, is a precursor to acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter that is essential for attention and memory encoding. So to wrap things up, this entire framework is not about optimization for the sake of optimization. It's about reducing friction. When the brain has stable energy supply, efficient signaling, and adequate blood flow, appropriate structural materials, mental effort feels lighter. Your focus will last longer and learning becomes easier. Not because you're forcing yourself harder, but because your system is functioning closer to how it's supposed to be functioning. So the reason I'm doing this video is to make you understand that nutrition plays a huge role, not just in building your muscles and making you look good, but also in making sure that your brain functions at an optimal level. Also, diet is one of the fastest things that you can control in your daily life. So I hope you found this video helpful. Like and subscribe. See you next time.